back to 8,000 Miles to TapTown. So great to see you. My name is Finbar, and this is Bill Burke, 8-String Orchestra. Many of you know by now that this series, 8,000 Miles to TapTown, is a series dedicated to the musical subculture of two-handed tapping, the instruments, the artists, the music, the inventions. On today's episode, I'm so proud to bring you Bill Burke. Bill's an incredible artist from the east coast of the USA, someone with over 1,000 performances under his belt, who's traveled the world and wowed audiences with his mesmerizing solo performances and his unique ensemble work. Bill has an absolute command of his 8-string Warr guitar, evoking sort of rhythmic trances and grooves with the left hand and searing leads with the right hand, and putting it all together to create a sort of a Michael Hedges-esque sort of landscapes as well. On this episode of 8,000 Miles to TapTown, I'm joined by Jim Wright, friend of the show, amazing player, worked at Warr Guitars, and we talked with Bill about the early days, how he got into tapping, how he found the Warr Guitar, some of the conversations between Jim and Bill at Warr, all the way through to where he's at today. It was a great conversation with an incredible artist. Ladies and gentlemen, Bill Burke. Bill Burke, welcome to the show, buddy. It's amazing to have you on. Thanks so much for joining us from, again, all the way around the other side of the world from me in Melbourne, Australia.
Oh, great to be here, Finn. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, my pleasure, mate. And, of course, the one, the only Jim Wright. Jim, thanks for joining us again.
It's my pleasure, and congratulations on the series, Finbar. It's great for you to be showing the panoply of the touch guitar world.
Yeah, well, you know, I know all three of us are just besotted by it, and you know, you guys have done both amazing things with the instrument. I'm just in awe of what you're both doing, and so you know, it's just great to be able to connect like this. So, Bill, like, mate, you've got an amazing career. You know, looking through what you've done and what you're doing, I'm in awe of it, and you know, I just really wanted to get to understand where you got started. How did you find this instrument, and where were you at the time when you found it? What were you musically, and where has it taken you?
Well, it pretty much started back in the late 80s. I heard a guitarist by the name of Michael Hedges playing on an album called Aerial Boundaries. I think that was in the late 80s, around 87, 88. And there was another guy on that album, Michael Manring, playing bass. So I kind of started following those two guys and saying, what are they actually doing here? I didn't really realize until many years later what technique they were employing to get the huge, tremendous sound they were getting out of their individual instruments. So being a bass player and a guitarist, I just kind of pursued them not as a main line of thought or a main line of thinking, but just someone, you know, a couple people that were always in the background, always pressing me to say, wait, let's revisit this. Let's listen to it again. Let's listen to it again. And at some point, I said, well, wait a second. I'm going to give a shot at what they're doing on bass and guitar, just incorporating the two-handed technique, trying to create multiple sounds out of one stringed instrument. Well, that led me down a road of, wait a second. There's these other instrumentalists out there who are doing similar things, but they're not limited to 4, 5, 6-string instruments. They're expanding their range. And through that process of finding Hedges, Manring, then I found, Stanley Jordan, who was doing the double neck thing, people like Jim, and then a couple of stick players, and Tony Levin, of course, was in there. And that kind of led me down the road of tapping in and of itself. But the solo thing for me really came about a little bit later on when I realized I could be one guy on a stage doing the job of two or three people. And that often became a practical matter because of not wanting to wait around for other band leaders to get me on for a gig, not waiting for, the next greatest pop star to call or something like that. That doesn't happen so often.
Yeah.
I was in a great position to
be the master of your own destiny, right?
Exactly. And to do a certain type of gig that this instrument is, well, the 8-string for me at least was very particularly suited.
Yeah, right. So what was it like? You've got the bass and the guitar and you're trying these things. When did you first see the Warr Guitar or the stick? Was that like early on you saw them and you had one, or did you how did that come about when you first got that instrument and you was like, wow, new tuning, new XYZ?
I saw Trey Gunn at, I think it was the University of Buffalo, playing with King Crimson. And the guys I was with, I was like, is that a stick? And they're like, no, that's a Warr Guitar. And the tone, the approach of that instrument, the Warr in comparison to any others, just really stuck out to me. Really, the tone was what captured my soul, so to speak. And once I heard what it could do, I decided, you know what, I'm gonna keep this thing in mind. Now, at the time, I wasn't actively pursuing any tap instrument, but a few years later, I'm in New York City, and sure enough, a bunch of the people I'm gigging with have these instruments, not necessarily Warr guitars, but other tap instruments. Started checking them out, started playing them, and I never really came across one that suited me, so to speak. And really, it was, truth be told, a little bit later on down the line, I just kept visiting different people who had them, saying, hey, can I check this out, whatnot. And my wife finally said, hey, Bill, why don't you just call Warr Guitars? And I spoke with Jim, and this is many, many years ago. And we just kind of started a nice process of becoming comfortable with the woods, the application of the different materials to the sounds of the instrument, that type of thing. And I pretty much just went for it at that point and said, you know what, I'm going to give this thing a shot. And if it doesn't work out, that's okay. But I really wanted to just create a bigger sound by myself without having to be at the whim of anybody else, so to speak. Just to broaden the horizons of what I could do musically, and pretty much pull some of the things that I had been hearing in my head that I couldn't do on, let's say, bass or 6-string, or any combinations of like a 6-string bass or with real thin, light solo strings. It was always just a little bit too difficult to execute what I was hearing in my mind. And seriously, the day I got the Warr Guitar, I pulled it out, played it for hours, and I think I had the first 2 videos that I've ever produced on that instrument well on their way to being done. So it really was a good fit. It's that sound, it's that tone, and then the comfortable feel of the instrument as well. It really does kind of allow your creativity to flow. It can seem intimidating if you're coming from a 4, 5, 6-string background to even add 2 additional strings. But that instrument, something about it makes you want to play it. And I don't know. There's a movement on it that my mind at least found very intuitive for what I wanted to do at least. And, I know there are people that go a variety of directions on it, and that was something else I found very appealing. I wasn't particularly coming from the background of specifically jazz or rock or anything like that. I had been listening to, first and foremost, Hedges, Mannering, a little bit more of an ethereal sound to it, and that really just fell right into place for me right at the get-go of having the instrument.
Yeah. Well, what blew me away was, I decided at the beginning of COVID, I'd come back from the US, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to give this thing a real shot. I got my stick, and it was great. And then this Warr guitar came up that was out of Canada, and it didn't even come up. I just hassled the guy to sell it to me. And he was like, oh, well, I don't really want to send it. And I said, that's all right. I'll jump on a plane and fly to Nova Scotia or wherever it was to pick it up. And the guy was like, are you insane? I'm like, yeah, probably. But, this was what I just want it. So anyway, long story short, I bought it, and it arrived, and it was all boxed up, and it cost me about $1,000 to ship it or whatever. But anyway, I just wanted to get it. And I remember sitting in the studio behind me here and plugging it in the first time, and I was like, okay, this looks amazing, feels great. And I just hit a note, and it was just like earthquakes. It was just, the bottom end was so fat, and it was just amazing. Blew me away, So again, it was just like you, it was a bit of a risk in a way. I'm spending all this money to get this thing on the premise of, and when through life you buy things and you spend all this money and you get them and you're like, oh yeah, it's okay. Well, for me, the Warr guitar was just like, oh my God, this is, it's like I had God in my hands, it was just incredible. So
yeah, the sustain for me when I first, tapped those first few notes, and just that resonant sound, just full. And I mean, it was amazing. I got to say, I can think back on it now and remember those first few days not wanting to leave the instrument, getting only a couple hours of sleep a night, working at it, playing it, running off teaching guitar and bass lessons, running right back home, getting on it, maybe getting a bite of food, sleeping a couple hours, and repeating it every day, rinse and repeat. And I couldn't agree more. It's one of those chances that really did pay off, I'd say.
And so, Jim, you how did you and Bill meet? Where did that all start?
It was because I was working for Warr Guitars between 2000 and 2008, and compared to a lot of the other players I know, Bill just has a really good business sense. It's striking when you meet him that he's good on one-on-one conversation, but then you go look at his website and he's really got that together, and you look at the gigs he's done, and so he impressed me with that right away. And then the other thing I really liked about him was that he doesn't just play solo. He creates ensembles with different instruments. And this is what's so important to me about the Warr is a tap guitar is no good to me if I can't play with other instruments and sound good. And that the Warr just fits that so well. And that's what I like about Bill's playing, is you see him playing with vibraphonists and even with other bassists, with him just handling the guitar role. And I don't understand why his tuning isn't more popular. It should be the first step for any six-string guitarist interested in the instrument. I believe you're from a low B, is that correct? A B flat, your lowest string, Bill?
I'm B. I go B, E, A, D, G, C,
okay.
F, B flat. Yeah.
And you're tuned in straight fourths. Yeah. It would be easy to tune the upper strings down a half step and have a guitar tuning and be able to play all the bar chords. I have friends who play 8-string Kiesel guitars, and they've handed me the instruments, and man, those lower two strings completely confuse me as a guitar player. It takes me a real while to adjust, but I see the advantage of having that kind of range. And so I've always thought that Bill's tuning was real practical. I liked what he did. He incorporates harmonics. He's kind of all over the place. Sometimes he's playing bass, sometimes he's playing guitar, sometimes he's playing both. And so to me, he's an anomaly, and he's a fascinating player for that reason. The only other fourth 8-string player I can think of is Joe Mendelson, who was briefly with Trey's band. And he's an East Coast guy. Do you know Joe?
I don't know him personally, but I've seen the materials, obviously, from Trey's work. Yeah. third star, I think, and
then I was lucky enough to meet him, and he became a friend instantly when we talked, and I had just switched my tuning, and he said, "Yeah, I don't want any upside down strings, man." I was like, "Yeah, this is my guy. I like this guy."
What I find is fascinating is we talk about anomalies. I think all Warr players are anomalies in a way. But I love that. I think there's something really fresh and inspirational about, finding new directions. It's sort of like uncovering, for me, it was like uncovering this new Pandora's box. It was like, I'd done all this stuff musically, and wasn't that I was bored. It was just that it was a job. Even though I wasn't doing it full time anymore, it was still, I'd pick up a guitar and it didn't inspire me like it used to. But what I find about is listening to your stuff, Bill, or other players, they're all so different. But again, I've found that it's just reignited a flame that was a little bit dead for me by getting onto this instrument. So I think, but I do think that the whole community of touch playing, whether it's a stick or a Warr guitar or a touch guitar or whatever it is, we're a unique community unto ourselves, I think.
Oh, indeed.
Absolutely.
And, I think there is just to kind of encapsulate everything that's being said there. And if I may pull in from my experience, when I was gigging at the time of putting the order in for the Warr guitar, I was primarily playing bass. Moved from New York City down to DC, and I was with a great variety band, a couple really great rock bands, and we were gigging fairly regularly, but I was teaching a little too much for my liking at the time. I saw that the market could provide an opportunity for someone like myself if I pursued it in a certain way. So the first and foremost, the fourths tuning, which is my preferred tuning when I give instruction and tapping, was just an easy match. I mean, the string, the scales are all the same. I mean, you really don't have to learn too much anything new. If you've got a basic understanding or even not, you can get your hands on the instrument and start making really interesting sounds, if not compositions, pretty quickly with that tuning, in my opinion. So knowing that I wanted to gig more, I thought the fourths tuning would be just logically the easiest quickest, I should say, way for me to go. And I'm glad I did go that way. Because, for instance, speaking of other players, my first album as a Warr guitarist, let's say, was with other instrumentalists. I have a great violinist on there, cello, a tabla player, Sandy Berman, who did it Outbound with Bela Fleck and the Flecktones. He's on that one. I had a great engineer I worked with that, who's gone on to win now quite a few Grammy Awards for his work with Jazz at Lincoln Center. And there was just a great community of players that kind of saw that instrument and weren't going to say, no, we're not doing that. I don't want to do this with you, Bill. They're all kind of intrigued by it. And I had at least enough knowledge pushing the pedal a little bit too quickly because I was doing force tuning, because I wasn't trying to go outside of my wheelhouse too far, that I could pull it together in a pretty good span of time and put out a pretty decent product. So I think there's a lot to be said about the tuning and the way the instrument can work into a variety of situations. Duo, I did, solo, duo, trio. I've had quartets. I've had, 7-person orchestra, orchestral works going on in different situations. And it's pretty interesting in that regard. I think the limitations are yet to be seen. We're just touching the tip of the iceberg, I believe. I mean, there's all sorts of debate about when did tapping start? Who's the first one to really do it that I see? And I know that there are some valid reasons to go one way or the other, but I think at the end of the day, that's all great. But really, we're nowhere near saying where it can go. I think it can go in a myriad of new directions, especially if contemporary music in the truest sense starts to filter a little bit closer back to everybody's home and heart, giving a chance to explore maybe new genres of music yet to be discovered. I think it's going to have a place in a lot moving forward.
I think that's a really interesting point, because for me, a lot of people look at a stick or a Warr guitar or whatever, and the first thing that comes to their mind is, oh, that's too confusing. It's just like, or that's too scary. And that's normally comes from someone who plays bass or guitar or another instrument whereby, a stringed instrument where it just looks confusing. And because of that, there's that instant sort of, not fear, but there's this pushback of, I don't really want to have to learn something new, or it takes a certain amount of discovery and want and desire to go and have the ability to throw your ego away for a moment and go, I'm going to start again. But what I find is really fascinating for me is that if you can just get your mind into what you're talking about, Bill, is that it actually, if using your tuning, for example, it actually becomes a lot easier, especially if you've got that background. It's like, that's how that maps. That's how that, at least that was my experience. You know, I jumped straight into lessons with Jim and with someone else. And it was like straight away, I was like, that makes sense. That makes sense. It was like someone would just put the jigsaw pieces around in a different order. And I was like, this is actually really easy. It's not, and it was the opposite. I thought it was going to be a lot more challenging. Obviously, there was some technique, but I've been doing 8-finger on guitar for a long time. So it wasn't that much of a challenge for me, but it was the mindset was, okay, I'm going to have to learn something brand new and start from the beginning. But I found out I actually didn't. And I found out it was actually a lot easier than I thought. But it was that initial hurdle of taking that dive into the pool type thing. You know what I mean?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And I think that's great that you were able to find someone to facilitate a little bit, because that can get you over some of those initial hurdles. I pretty much was self-taught at the beginning, and I should have sought out some help at the time. And I think back, and it's like there was some great players very close to where I was that I just, for whatever reason, because, you know, life is the way it is, I wasn't able to do also,
it. You seem to have done pretty good. So I think.
Oh, geez. Well, you know, I hope I did.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think there's also something else that when you don't have rules, it's actually, you help define your own sound even. You know, if you can get through that, but on your own discovery, you can actually cultivate your own sound quicker, I believe.
I think you're right. I think there's something to be said about that. And yeah, I think I benefit to both. I don't want to, you know, I think if anybody is out there looking for help and they can seek it out and get it, that's great. But yeah, there's no reason to not dive into it. And that's what I did. I had been playing, well, initially at the time, I did an album actually with one of Stanley Jordan's students, a guy by the name of Anthony Mazzella, and I was tapping on bass for that recording. And through that process, I had started to develop some solo pieces on bass, but I could never really get them the way I wanted them to be. I never released them, never really performed them outside of my, you know, my own little studio. So I got in there with the extra 8 strings, and I immediately could apply what I had been doing on bass to the 8 string, and that just was a good foundation for building upon. And many of my students that I've had in the past are bassists or guitarists, tune in fourths, and you can learn, it's a tune called Early August with Jennifer. Anybody can learn that on any stringed instrument. It's easy. It's just a simple pattern, but it gets you playing the instrument. It gets you touching it and hearing it and thinking about different avenues of approach as you develop as a player and as a musician. A composer, I should say.
Yeah. And Jim,
I would just elaborate on it and agree with. I would just elaborate on what you both said and agree with Finbar that if you're just playing, for example, if you have a 2-course instrument like a typically tuned 4th, 5th instrument, it's very easy when you start to do one side or the other at a time. Like I think that's what Finbar was implying is. If you just concentrate on one side of the instrument, it actually is easier. I could instantly play scales much faster on a tap instrument than I ever could on guitar because you're trying to synchronize your picking hand with your fretting hand. It's when you try to integrate the two sides together, which is where all the difficulty comes. And so you've seen certain people like Tony Levin and that whole crafty school that they just concentrate on both hands doing the same thing. Tony rarely ever plays 2 ideas at once. He does sometimes. So does Trey. From what I know of Marcus Reuter's playing, both hands are occupied on playing the same idea, which makes the whole technique a lot easier. And of course, lets you do things that you can't do when one hand is playing bass and the other hand is playing guitar. And as Bill says, I think we're just at the beginning of seeing what people can do with all of this. There are techniques out there that people haven't discovered yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I seem to love is that you can you can play two parts, but you can morph them as you're playing into one part and then back to two parts, or you can play just one part where all the fingers are going into one soundscape, or you can actually then move it out with two different sounds. It gives this, it's like having a keyboard that's got one sound, or you can split the keyboard and do different things. But to me, that was the idea compositionally, to start to then have, polychords or different things sitting over each other. It just, for me, musically, I taught at the conservatorium. I used to teach all this theory, and it was only until I really got this instrument that I was like, this all makes sense now. Before, I was teaching all this theory, and here's the extensions, and this goes over that, and here's the diatonic melodics, but then it was just like, it's really easy. It's just that over that equals that, and it was like, But it took actually getting the instrument for me to actually visualize it the way I could visualize it. And then actually it was like someone just put the final piece in the clock that made it all sort of go together. But yeah, no, I love the fact that I can create a piece where both hands are doing one sound, or I can actually create a piece that both hands are doing different sounds and different parts. I don't know. What do you think about that, Bill? Like you do all sorts of things.
I agree completely. One thing that I would add in there, and hit or miss with some people or not, but when I was developing as a player, and actually up until everything, all the lockdowns and whatnot, I was doing things with a looper as well.
Right.
And I would do two-hand independent playing, loop it as it's a chorus, and then solo over top of it with two hands doing their own thing, like you would say, let's say with a traditional guitar. But all those flavors of then putting in bar chords and being able to do your different manipulations, whether it be modal or, you can think about things a lot of different ways. I don't want to get too heavy into the theory, but you really can create a 3, 4, 5-part sounding piece of music on one instrument. And I never got too elaborate with the looper. It was always live, on, off, and overdubs. That was it. Never did any, when it was bad, it's bad. And when it was good, it was pretty good. But, I get into situations where I play with multiple drummers with that looper and myself, and you can create a sound that can fill a pretty good room doing that. I mean, you really can. The limitations, I never really found myself revisiting too much. I always found myself wanting to push a little further and a little further, and I think it can go on. I mean, back to the initial, one of the things with these instruments is young people just don't have access to them at one of their music stores down the street, so to speak. And once I think the young people see it and they touch it, and in my experiences, they really dig it. I mean, they think that it's accessible to their own way of thinking. I mean, if we get maybe some people down the line who think of that as a primary instrument earlier on in life, that would be a benefit, I think, to the whole enterprise.
I think so, obviously. I spoke to Pete about that, and about the cheaper Austin Douglas or whatever guitars he's got, and
right.
It's because they're all handcrafted, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But look, I think there's some Chinese websites or something that have some touch instruments. I don't know whether they're any good or not, but you're right. It's a big barrier of entry to go and buy a Warr guitar or even a Chapman stick for that sense. It's many thousands of dollars. It's a big investment on something that if you can't play it or touch it, to know whether it's is going to be a hurdle to get over until someone does mass produce them.
Right.
But
I don't know anymore. I don't know if there's that Crappy Guitar Company around, Jim. Do you know them? You heard of them? Either of you? The Crappy? They were trying something for.
It's not a good name, is it?
No, it's not. But they were trying. I think they were trying to do something in the 600 to 800 range.
I just had this visualization of having a crappy guitar with a bad loop going that keeps repeating the bad loop. You're on a crappy guitar and you go, "It's the brand, man. It's the brand."
I mean, I like that he was reusing found wood. You know, he would find old chest of drawers that people had thrown out, and this is something we'll have to deal with in the future.
Yes, like, how come you've got a handle on the back of your guitar? Oh, that came from the drawer.
Why does it say Ethan Allen on the back of your guitar?
Right.
Yeah, produce company.
But we are going to have to think in the future about woods. Not everybody is going to be able in 10 years to have their little piece of the rainforest like we do right now.
What's fascinating to me, though, is I've got one of my favorite, I've got lots of custom guitars I've had built over the years. One of my favorite guitars is a Parker Fly. And, it's got a composite fingerboard. I've had it all around the world with me in all different temperatures from, Norway to the US to even to Singapore where the humidity is like 98 degrees. And the neck never moves. It still sounds great. It's got partly wood body, but surely there's going to be some new composite materials that got great tonality. It's got to happen.
Yeah, but there are also woods like my black guitar is a poplar body. This is not an endangered wood. It grows quickly. It absorbs more CO2 than most other woods as it grows. The neck is maple. The only really kind of specialty wood on that guitar is the fingerboard, which we're still debating 20 years later. Is this Goncalo? Is it Bupingo? We don't know. Nobody remembers. And it's so dirty now from all of my finger smudges that we can't even tell anymore. But basically, the poplar sounds really good. It's just not an attractive wood, and that's why it's painted black.
Well, you know what? That's one of my experiences was, I had a Chapman stick, which I can say, I just want a rosewood stick, bang, job done. When I wanted to get a Warr guitar, because I've ordered a second one now from Pete.
Oh, nice.
It was like going through a census survey in buying a guitar, because it was like, okay, what wood do you want? Do you want this on the fingerboard? How do you want this? What do you want? And I was like, oh, dude, I don't know. It's like, what do you recommend? And he goes, well, I don't want to recommend it. It's up to you. And I'm like, it was like this. I had to go an in-depth course on understanding wood and tonality. And so it was a very involved process just to buy a custom-built guitar from Pete. But, but he knows so much about it. And that's obviously why the instruments are all so great. Oftentimes I'd be saying to Pete, look, I don't know, man. I just play the thing. I just know I like this sound. What do you recommend? And it's like, it was this backward and forward of this process that was gestating this new instrument. So it's still a while away till I get it, but it's hopefully it's going to turn out pretty amazing. I'm sure it will.
What's the lag time on something like that now, Finbar? Is it?
It's a lot of money. Like landed in Australia, because mine is like, it's all transparent black with quilt maple top and in glow inlays, and the Warr at the top is in vertical. It's like I've got all these custom things on it. So it's about 10,000 landed in Australia.
Wow, okay.
Once you pay taxes and import duties and all that sort of stuff. So that's Australian, which is about $7 US or something. It's
okay. Wow. Yeah, but you figure though, I'm seeing people pay that much easily for acoustic 6 strings.
Oh look, I've got a Gibson Aaron Lewis that my mate Aaron gave me. He was a singer of Sustained. He gave me one of these custom Gibsons that Rand Ferguson built. And the retail on that's about 17,000 US. It's one of 25. Wow. So it's not in the big scheme of things. It's not that big a deal. I've got a lot of guitars worth more than that. So
okay, yeah, I think I saw Yuli John Roth had one that was 32,000 that he made himself, the Galaxy or something.
Look at Eddie Van Halen, it's like
yeah. And that's great to hear. Pete's making the all the instruments again.
Yeah, he's making them now. Yeah,
great. I've always wanted to get one of his basses too.
Yep,
I hear they're fantastic. Just haven't come across one.
They're really nice.
It's I don't think anything Pete touches is bad.
Bill.
Right. Pardon me, Jim?
I don't know I don't know if you knew, Bill, but Pete is now making the pickups for them also.
Oh, is now?
Which
Last I talked to Mark, he was making his own, but I never got my hands on one. Are they pretty amazing?
Amazing.
Yes, I actually once I got a new guitar in 2019 with Pete's pickups, and after about a year with it, I said, "Please make me some for my black guitar." He had offered for years to make me pickups for my black guitar, and I had refused because I liked the way that it sounded. But after I got his new ones, I said, "Okay, please make me a set." So he just recently delivered them to me, and I installed them myself in the guitar. And I'm going to do a video about them later. But I like them very much. And when I worked with Warr Guitars, it was always a problem getting pickups from Bartolini because I think I pointed out on the Warr Guitars Worldwide Facebook page that I did a page for Mark's website, which is hidden. You can still find it if you're resourceful. That shows at least 16 different tunings that were available at the time I was working for Warr Guitars. This was a problem with Bartolini because we were only ordering so many of each tuning. And sometimes it would hold up building an instrument because we couldn't get pickups for an instrument. So I think, and I believe Mark was involved in this process too, though I'm not absolutely certain. He and Pete together came up with the idea for building the pickups, and I think they're just awesome. They have better crosstalk figures than the other pickups did. They sound great, whether you're clean or distorted. I'm very happy with them. So it's nice to see them doing that now, and hopefully it speeds up building a guitar.
And is that active? You're going to straight active with all of his pickups, Jim?
You can go either way.
I found them. My guitar, Bill, is one of the more modern ones. It's got Pete's pickups in them. It was only built in 2016 or something, so it's quite a recent one. And I found personally, I played one with the Bartolinis, and they sounded very jazzy, very sort of very warm. Whereas these ones are much more open. They don't sound compressed like an active pickup. It's 18-volt active, but they don't sound. They've got the balance, but they don't sound overly compressed. They sound very open to me. So they work really well under a lot of gain or clean. And mine's got the piezos in them, so a lot of different tone shaping as well as with the magnetics. But yeah, look, I really like them. I think they sound great.
That's wonderful. Now, Finbar, are you playing 10 and 12 or just 12?
Just 12. String? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's a good way to go.
I'm used to it. It's like I've got one. The one I've got now is crossed, and I'm really feeling really comfortable with that cross tuning now. But the new one I've ordered is uncrossed, so I'm going to have best of both worlds. I like to mix it up. So who knows?
Yeah, and Jim, you pretty much exclusively do uncrossed, right?
Yeah, he does.
Can you hear me there, Jim?
I couldn't be happier with it.
Okay.
I was the Bruce Jenner of the tap guitar world. I always knew I had to have another tuning. I struggled with cross tunings for 18 years, and it wasn't until the advent of Mark and his company that I was able to solve that problem. And as Finbar says, you go back and you start all over again. And I started all over in 98 when I switched my tuning. And every day I thank my lucky stars that I did. I could talk about it for hours about how much I like it, but everybody's sick of hearing me talk about it because everybody has so much time invested in cross tuning. And this is another reason I enjoy Bill's playing, is he's not dealing with any of that. Is your instrument even stereo, Bill, or is it mono?
It is stereo, yes. It is stereo, which I love because that allows me to process a little bit differently. When I'm doing the two-hand independent parts, it allows me to process a little bit differently on the high end as opposed to the low. And that just, I think, adds another level of flavor, another level to the instrument that I'm really happy. There's some things that you have to deal with, especially I think on the 8-string. You don't want to get too much crosstalk between the strings and make sure, you don't want too much distorted sound on your low end. But often with the instrument, I find that that's often just a position adjustment. if you decide that you're going to play your low notes in a certain position on the instrument, you can really control any feedback of the treble side into the low end and vice versa. So,
and what does your
it's one
rig
of the
look
things.
like, Bill? Like,
Yeah.
what's your rig? Like, what do you go into? Do you go into some like processors, Axe-Effects, or amps, or?
Well, usually what I do is, I've got a couple compressors that I go into. Diamonds out of
Yep.
they're a Canadian company.
Yep.
I got a couple diamonds, one for the high, one for the low. Now the diamond on the high, I use that kind of like an overdrive,
Right.
where if I just want to get just a boost, I should say boost.
Right.
When I want to get just a little extra oomph for solo sections, especially if I'm playing with, let's say, the looper, and I always loop where it's mono. I never get it going where there's two speakers, breaking up a loop, bass and treble. It's always coming out mono, and that just gives me a little extra presence on the top. And I also use one of their reverb units, and then on the low end, I go into a UA 610, which is a really nice, just wonderful sounding mic pre for both bass and treble. But in this instance, I use it really on the low end. I also use it for my 5-string bass guitar as well. Then out of that, depending on the size of the rig, I'll usually go into 1 or 2 crowns, and then out into 1 or 2 cabinets. Right.
Nice.
A lot of what you'll see in some of the videos that I'm starting to put out now, it's a nice full range, what's called an El Wapo. It's an Acu groove on the bottom and then an EA 210 on the top. And I kind of, for a while, if I go through a mixer, I'll often try to, do a little bit of separation just through panning between the high and the low. Right. So, it's funny. It's a lot of stereo splitting, a lot of work to get the different sounds that ultimately, in a lot of cases, just end up being put back in the mono. But it really does create the sound that I'm looking for. And for, clubs, let's say, if I'm doing a more low key gig that, it's more of a cocktail clientele, then I might actually pull out the 2 old Barbettas and do something a little bit more interesting with the panning. But for the most part, if I stack them, I've got 2 L2s that I can give direct lines to the board with. Yeah. So I can have my own stage presence and volume that doesn't get interrupted by whatever the sound guy is doing. And that seems to work out well for me. Yeah. It sounds more complicated than it is when you look at it.
No, that doesn't sound complicated. Like I've got a bunch of gear. I've got Eventides, Axe-Effects. I've got all this stuff in my racks here. I found the best sound I've got a Digico console behind me, but I just use it in the studio. But I found, for me, the best sound that I've got is on the bass running into a Demeter bass preamp, a HBP1. Yeah. And then on the melody side, I run into an Avalon 737. And then those two, it's just like, and I can just add a tiny bit of, and I'll just run the effects through the inserts, but just in terms of clean sound, it's kick-ass.
I mean, that Avalon with the Warr guitars got to give you one of the glassiest, most beautiful legato sounds if you want on the plant. I mean, you can't duplicate that on another instrument, in my opinion.
Yeah,
I don't think you can.
It sounds unbelievable. Like I plug in, and it's just, when you plug in every time, and you're just like, every time you touch it, it's like, oh, it sounds so good.
It's hard to get those breaks. I'm not joking. When I was first doing it, it would be, up early 5 a.m. and just play until I had to go teach at 1:32 in the afternoon, get back at 9:30 at 10, play for a few hours. I mean, I just didn't want to do anything but touch the instrument. And there's something incredible about them. I mean, they're really unique, and the tone is there. I think that tone, as the instrument develops and new materials are brought about, if it's captured and it's contained within the instrument, it's going to be here to stay, I think. I don't see it going away.
I joke with people saying, I bought a PS5 and I don't play it because I've got my Warr guitar,
Oh, that's funny. Well, that's good. I mean, isn't it better to be on the Warr guitar?
Oh, much better. But, but that resonates with a younger audience. They're like, what? You got a PS5? And I'm like, yeah, well, look, I play it, but I got a Warr guitar, man. It's like, they're like, what's a Warr guitar? And it's like, oh, well, let me show you,
People still... Oh, sorry, Jim.
That's all right. I was just going to say, I had a similar experience to what Bill is talking about. When I first got my first Warr guitar, even though it was still in cross tuning, I would play it for an hour, and the thing that really struck me right off was I went to the bridge pickup on the bass side, and there was that Jaco Pastorius Fender tone, and I had never had that from a touch guitar before. And then I would play the guitar side and get sustain, and I literally would call up Mark and leave message on the machine. "You bastard, you've done it! I can't believe it!" And I'm sure he got.
And he's probably answering the phone, like listening. His wife probably put the answering machine on, going, "What the hell? What's going on here?"
Exactly. I can't believe he actually hired me to work for him later after all that. But yeah, I still have that. When I play it, sometimes I'll play for a half an hour and I'm just like, I'm not hitting the ceiling here. There's so much more room above where I am and what I could do with it. And I agree with everything you're all saying. It's so great to have that kind of boutique instrument for this technique that gives you all that support for what you're trying to do.
Great. So, Bill, what's next, buddy? What are you up to at the moment? Like, what are you working on?
Currently, I'm doing it right now. Actually, the phone's been ringing a little bit. I can't complain. So I did get on with a guy by the name of Kev Rowe, someone I was on a tour bus for a little while back in 2012, 2013. We were
and you still talk to each other?
What's that?
I was going to say, and you still talk to each other? Normally after a tour
bus
tour, it's like...
Yeah, what happens on the bus stays on the bus.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I've done a few of his albums since that band did break up for all but good reasons, and it was a great band. It was doing some good things. We got a lot of work out there and a certain circuit, and had a lot of good time. So it's good to stay in touch with some of the people in that. And Kev, I'm doing his album now, and he's going to release it. He's a very smart individual at the marketing, and I admit I've not been in that marketing realm the way I should be with the releasing things 1 month apart from each other, and then at the end of 12 months release the whole thing. And it's going to be interesting to see how he does this. So that's going on. And then I have been offered quite a few gigs in the New York City and Philadelphia areas, but right now I'm not taking those for a couple reasons. And you got to be careful with everything that's going on, and
sure,
keeping this group of agents happy and that group of agents happy. So
yeah,
doing that, primarily bass, but I'll be getting back to the Warr as soon as I can and as soon as it's feasible. That's pretty much where I'm at.
Well, that's great, mate. Well, it's mate, it's an honor to have you on. I just love being able to connect with great players like yourself. People just very inspiring around the world doing great things. And Jim, as always, just the great stories, and I find that it's the stories behind the stories are where, for me, the magic is. It's like I just love unpacking that stuff, and it's just great having you on, and really, really appreciate your time. And I'll put some links to your stuff on the episode, and if anyone wants to get in contact with Bill, he's there, or Jim, and if you want lessons or whatever it is, yeah, Jim, go.
I'm sorry, I know you're trying to wrap things up, but I was hoping that Bill might be able to help with any kind of history about the 8-string tap guitar. And I'll try to make this quick. I can see you're trying to wrap things up, and I'm sorry for interrupting.
That's right.
I, like so many players, started on the original stick 10-string tuning. I saw it expand to 11 strings, and then all of a sudden there was Trey with an 8-string instrument in his crafty tuning, which he has since kind of gone on back to a 10-string tuning with, I believe, fifths on the guitar side. What is your experience with that, Bill? And is that why you went directly to an 8-string? And now that you tell me about your whole influence with Michael Hedges, everything makes sense about your playing and your writing and everything. But just if you can, fill us on any interesting history that you might have about the early 8-string development.
Ooh, you know what? I don't mean to give you a paucity of information here on this one, Jim, but I went to the 8-string because I figured it was the natural extension of the bass. I thought it was going to allow me to extend my range with the tapping I was doing on the bass, and I was wildly surprised to see that it was that plus so much more.
Yeah.
You know, the
So
octave.
The 8-string was already a thing when you contacted Mark.
As far as I know, I believe it was. I believe, and I forget the fella's name out of New Jersey who passed away a few years.
Oh, Ray Ashley.
Yes, I believe he played 8-string Austin Douglas, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, I think you're correct.
But other than that, really, I didn't really know any other players, Jim. I just figured for me that was going to be the next logical step to get out what I was hearing in my own mind.
Ray is an interesting link in that chain that I had forgotten about. So that alone right there might be enough.
Okay, because when I was mentioning earlier, I realized that there were people I could have studied with, but just didn't know enough to talk to him.
Wow.
Ray was the fellow I was talking about.
Yeah. Ray
I
is a
learned,
whole part
after the fact that he was around and available, and I just didn't utilize that resource because I wasn't aware.
Yeah, Ray is a whole part of touch guitar history that people don't even know about. So thank you for bringing them up.
Okay, sure.
Well, it's just that the last artifact that just raised the surface there is that it came out of your wanting to explore, trying to figure out these sounds. Just going back to the beginning now, trying to figure out these sounds of how Michael Hedges and these other artists were doing these sounds, and you on the bass and the extension of the bass going, how do I do it from here? And I think that's a great thematic message for the whole episode. Really, is for players out there that want to do more, that are feeling like they're reaching their limit. They've got their effects processes, they've got their instrument. Like there is a range of these instruments out there, of touch instruments that do allow you to go into a new dimension. The other artifact I can just replay back to everyone is that if you take the gamble, it's not that big of a step. It might look like it is, but it opens a whole new dimension to you. So I think all of us on this call would agree that it's a journey worth undertaking if you are looking to expand your musical horizons, and that's what this show's for, is to put a spotlight on it. So Bill, I thank you so much for your time, buddy. Really, really appreciate it. It's great getting to know you and your backstory and what you're doing, and it's very inspiring. And Jim, as usual, mate, it's you're a good buddy, and the stories of the war history and your playing and all that. It's just great to have this modern technology to allow us to connect all around the world. And when all this craziness is over, hopefully we'll have a big meet up somewhere and have a barbecue or something.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Finbar. I really appreciate it. I know you're getting up early in the morning there for this, and
mate,
yeah, it's really
what
really
you're saying. Like you get up and you play the Warr Guitar. I enjoy doing this. I love it. It's great. It's great connecting with you guys.
Oh, thank you very much. Really appreciate being here.
Thanks again, guys. Have a fantastic day.
You too. Thanks, Finbar.
See you guys. Bye.
Bye now.